I remember looking at my phone screen and seeing the number of missed calls, 28. It seemed like an impossible number, especially since they were all from my family, the same people who hadn't had time for me just a day before. I was lying in a hospital bed and my hand was shaking a little as I held the phone. The room was quiet except for the steady sound of the heart monitor next to me. The air smelled like disinfectant, and I could feel the plastic tubes taped to my arm. An automated cuff on my other arm tightened every so often to check my blood pressure. I blinked, trying to keep my eyes clear, and looked back at the phone. The group chat was still open, showing the last messages. My brother, Mark, had sent a short text saying he was busy. My parents had replied that they had a neighborhood barbecue to attend. My own response was just one word: fine. Now it seemed they were suddenly very interested in talking. But I didn't have the strength. I turned the phone's screen off and set it face down on my chest, then closed my eyes. Everything had started about 30 hours before that, when I was standing at the baggage claim at the airport. The terminal had that familiar airport smell, a mix of coffee from a stand nearby and the faint odor of fuel. I was exhausted after 2 flights, including a rough patch of turbulence that had kept everyone in their seats. My body ached, especially the dull, persistent feeling where my left arm used to be. The harness for my prosthesis was digging into my shoulder, and the skin underneath the strap felt sore and chafed. When the carousel started moving, I got ready, using my right hand to brace myself. The bag started coming out, and I watched for mine. It was a large black suitcase with a bright yellow tag. My late husband, Ben, used to tease me about it, calling it the Bumblebee. Getting it off the belt was difficult. It felt like I was trying to move a piece of furniture with only one arm. I had to plant my feet and pull with all my strength until it finally dropped to the floor next to me. I was sweating, even though the airport air conditioning was cold. I stood there for a minute, catching my breath, and then took out my phone. I opened the group text with my family. I typed, "My flight lands at 5:00 p.m. Can someone pick me up?" I saw the little dots that meant someone was typing, but then they vanished. A minute later, a message from my brother Mark came in. "Busy, just grab an Uber." Then another from my mother. "We have a barbecue tonight. You should have given us more notice." I read the messages a few times. I had spent months in the hospital overseas, imagining what coming home would be like. I thought maybe they would be at the gate, or at least waiting in the arrivals area. I hadn't expected to be told to find my own ride. I typed back, "Fine." After I sent it, I felt a familiar sense of disappointment settle over me. I didn't get upset or try to argue. I just accepted it the way I always had. The line for the rideshare area outside was long. People were waiting with their luggage, and the sun was setting, casting a bright glare on the glass doors. I felt a little unsteady on my feet after the long flight. The driver who eventually picked me up was a nice man who helped me get my heavy bag into the trunk without staring at my arm. I got into the back and rested my head against the cool glass of the window. The drive was quiet. I noticed every little bump in the road, and the prosthetic was uncomfortable, so I kept trying to adjust it. By the time we got to my neighborhood, it was almost dark. The street looked peaceful, with lights on in most of the houses. I could smell barbecue smoke in the air, which reminded me of my parents' text. I wondered if they were at their party right now. My own house was dark and cold when I unlocked the door. The air inside felt old. I had asked my parents to turn the heat on before I got here, but they must not have remembered. There was a large pile of mail near the door, which I'd asked my brother to sort through. The refrigerator was nearly empty, just a few old jars of condiments. I was too tired to do anything, so I just sat down on the couch, still in my coat. The house was completely silent, and I fell asleep almost immediately. I woke up much later in complete darkness. I felt strange. My breathing sounded loud and rough, and my chest hurt. When I tried to sit up, the whole room seemed to spin, and I fell back down. I felt very dizzy. That's when I noticed a faint beeping sound. Across the room, I could see a small, flashing red light. It was the carbon monoxide detector. My phone was on the coffee table just a few feet away. I reached for it, but my arm felt heavy, and I couldn't quite touch it. My last thought before I lost consciousness was, well, at least I told them I was fine. The next time I woke up, I was in a different place. The lights were bright, and a nurse was standing next to me, checking the IV line in my arm. I could hear the steady beep of a heart monitor. My throat was very dry, and my head ached, but the first thing I looked for was my phone. It was on the tray table next to the bed. The screen was lit up with notifications. It showed 28 missed calls, all from Mark, my mom, and my dad, and all from the last few hours. I just looked at it for a second. Then I let the screen go dark and looked away, toward the wall. I wasn't going to call them back. This feeling of being overlooked wasn't new. It had been happening long before I ever joined the military. I grew up in a normal house in a quiet neighborhood. We had a big maple tree in the front yard. My life and my parents' lives seemed to be centered on my older brother, Mark. He was 3 years older than me and was the star of his high school baseball team. He was the outgoing one, and I was the quiet, studious one. I was in the school band and always got good grades. My parents used to say I was the easy child, the one who never needed much. I think that was just a way for them to justify not paying much attention to me. I have a very clear memory from when I was 8 years old. I was climbing that maple tree when a branch broke, and I fell. I landed hard and broke my arm. The pain was intense, and my arm was bent at a strange angle. My parents took me to the emergency room, but as soon as the x-rays were done and my arm was in a temporary cast, they left. They dropped me off at a neighbor's house because Mark had a championship game that night. The team is counting on him, my mother explained as she was leaving. I sat on the neighbor's couch and told myself it was okay. I was fine. I was already learning to use that word. This pattern continued all through high school. Mark always got new equipment for baseball, and my parents paid for him to go to special camps. I had a part-time job at the local library to pay for my own clothes and any extras I wanted. I remember I won a statewide essay competition in my junior year. My parents came to the ceremony, but they left right after my name was called because Mark had an early practice the next morning. College was my first real escape. I earned a full scholarship to a university out of state. When I told my parents, the first thing my father asked was, "That means it won't cost us anything, does it?" I just nodded and said it was all covered. I think I still had a small hope that if I accomplished enough, they would finally be proud of me. When military recruiters visited the campus, I found myself drawn to them. It felt like a chance to be part of something important. I also thought that maybe, if I was in uniform, my parents would finally see me as someone worth paying attention to. Basic training was incredibly difficult, but in a way, I liked it. For the first time, I felt like I was part of a team where everyone was valued for what they could do. My fellow recruits didn't care about my family. They just cared that I could do my job and that they could count on me. After training, I was deployed to Afghanistan. It was a completely different world, hot and dusty. We worked long hours and didn't get much sleep. Mail from home was rare. When I did get letters, they were short. Mark would write about how his college baseball team was doing. My parents would just write, "Stay safe. Love, Mom and Dad." I kept one note from my mother taped up near my bunk. It just said, "Proud of you." I looked at those 3 words a lot, trying to believe them. But deep down, I knew they were proud of the idea of me. The idea of having a daughter in the service, as long as it didn't require any effort from them. I didn't join the military to get back at them, but I think a part of me did it to prove I was strong and capable. That hope was shattered the day our convoy was hit. It wasn't like in the movies. There was just a sudden, deafening explosion, and then everything went dark. When I woke up in a field hospital, my left arm was gone below the elbow. I just remember staring at the bandages, feeling numb. The letters I got from my family after that were brief. "We're glad you're alive. Get well soon." My brother Mark even sent me a picture of the new car he had just bought. I kept telling myself it was okay, that I was fine. But I couldn't help but wonder if losing my arm in combat wasn't enough to get their full attention. What would be? So I focused on my recovery. I learned to use my right hand for everything, and I started training with a prosthesis that was heavy and uncomfortable. I held on to the single image of coming home. I pictured getting off the plane and seeing them there, waiting for me. I thought that maybe then I would finally hear them say they were proud. But when I finally did land, all I got were text messages about a barbecue and an Uber. I typed, "Fine," because it was the only response I had ever been taught to give. Back at the Portland airport, the terminal felt busy and loud. I stood near the exit with my suitcase, trying to keep my balance. The long flight had left me feeling weak. My prosthetic was really bothering me, rubbing my shoulder raw. I was also incredibly thirsty, but the small cups of water on the plane hadn't been enough. All around me, people were hugging and greeting each other. I saw kids running to their grandparents and couples meeting with a kiss. I just stood there by myself, feeling the weight of that one-word text message. My phone indicated that my ride would be there in 5 minutes. The driver's name was Paul. I tried to just focus on my surroundings to keep from feeling overwhelmed. I smelled cinnamon rolls from a nearby shop and heard the squeak of shoes on the floor. When Paul arrived, he just nodded, and I tried to smile back. He put my heavy bag in the trunk for me, which I was grateful for. I got in the back and just watched the city go by. It felt strange to be back. The bridges and streets were familiar, but I felt disconnected from all of it. The drive to my house was quiet. When we arrived, I paid him and he told me to take care. The house was dark. I walked in and dropped my suitcase by the door. The air was cold and smelled musty. I checked the refrigerator, but it was empty except for some old condiments. I was too exhausted to even take my coat off. I sat on the couch just for a minute and fell asleep. When I woke up, it was completely dark. I felt confused and very sick. My head was throbbing and the room was spinning. I tried to get up but couldn't. Then I heard the beeping, and I saw the red light of the carbon monoxide detector. I realized what was happening. I tried to reach for my phone, which was on the table, but I couldn't move my arm far enough. I remember seeing the phone light up with a notification, but I couldn't read it. I felt myself losing consciousness. Lying in the hospital bed with the monitors beeping, I had a lot of time to think. Those missed calls on my phone seemed like a joke. Why were they so desperate to talk to me now? I knew the answer. It wasn't because they were worried about me. It was because they were worried about how this situation would make them look. My mind went back to the maple tree incident when I was 8. I remembered sitting on the neighbor's couch with my broken arm, waiting for them to come back from Mark's baseball game. It wasn't the first or last time. My high school graduation was another clear memory. I was the valedictorian, and I had worked hard on my speech. My parents came, but they stood in the back, and my dad kept checking his watch. They left almost immediately after I got my diploma to take Mark to a baseball tournament. There was no celebration, just a quick, good job. Even when I got my scholarship, my dad's only concern was the cost, while they were paying for Mark's expensive private university. I thought my wedding day would be different. I married Ben in a small ceremony, but my mother spent most of the reception talking to Mark's new girlfriend, and my dad complained about the food. Ben saw how upset I was and told me to just focus on us, but it still hurt. Every important moment of my life was treated as secondary to whatever Mark had going on. The military was my way out. When I shipped off, there was no party. My mom was busy packing a lunch for Mark's road trip, and my dad was checking the tires on his car, and after I was injured in Afghanistan, I called them from the hospital in Germany. My mother's first reaction was to ask about my insurance. My father wanted to know if I would still be paid. Mark sent a text message later that said, "That sucks. I got a new car." And I, as always, just replied that I was fine. Now, looking at the hospital ceiling, I understood that fine was just a word I used to protect myself from disappointment. I had survived a war, but the deeper injuries had come from my own family. Those 28 missed calls weren't for me. They were for them. The person who first reported my story was a journalist named David Lee. He was at the hospital doing a story on veterans' issues and happened to be in the break room when he overheard 2 paramedics talking. One of them was describing the call to my house. She had just returned from deployment, the paramedic said, and her family told her to get an Uber. We found her passed out, phone still open to the text chain. David Lee asked the paramedics a few more questions and then found my room. He was very polite and showed me his press pass. Ma'am, he said, I heard a little about your situation. I was wondering if you would be willing to share your story? My first instinct was to say no. I was used to keeping these things private. But then I thought about all those missed calls and my family's sudden false concern. I decided that for once I would tell the truth. So I talked. I told him about the long trip home, the discomfort of the prosthesis, and the difficulty I had with my luggage. I told him exactly what the text messages said. Busy, just grab an Uber, and we have a barbecue. David Lee wrote everything down, and I could tell he was surprised by the details. The segment appeared on the local news that night. The headline was something like, "Local veteran returns home to empty house." They didn't use my full name at first, and they blurred my face in the footage of me being moved on a stretcher, but the anchor explained the basic story. She said, After serving her country and losing an arm in combat, she returned home and asked her family for a ride. She was told to get an Uber. Hours later, she was found unconscious. They even had a short clip from the paramedic who said, finding her like that with the text messages still on her phone, it was heartbreaking. The next morning, the story was everywhere. People were sharing it on social media, and it was being picked up by other news outlets. My email inbox, which I checked from the hospital, was full of messages from people I didn't know. Other veterans wrote to share similar stories. People in the community offered to help, asking if I needed meals or a place to stay. While this was happening, my family's reaction was predictable. Mark called me repeatedly, leaving angry voicemails. "You're making us look terrible," he said in one. It was just a simple misunderstanding. My mother sent a series of long texts, explaining that the barbecue was an important neighborhood event and that they thought I would want my independence. My father left one short voicemail. "This has gotten out of control. Call us so we can figure out how to clear this up." They weren't sorry, they were just embarrassed. The community's response was the opposite. A local plumbing company called the hospital and offered to fix my pipes, which had apparently burst from the cold. A hotel offered me a free room. A local florist sent a large bouquet of flowers to my hospital room with a card that just said, "Welcome home from your neighbors." The nurses on the floor were very kind. One of them quietly told me, "Your family doesn't deserve you." The missed calls kept coming, the number climbing past 35, but I ignored them all. I wasn't going to help them fix this. They finally came to the hospital 2 days later. My mother came in first, holding a small bouquet of flowers from a grocery store. "Sarah, darling, we're here," she said loudly, as if for an audience. "We came as soon as we heard." Mark was right behind her, and he looked angry, not sad. My dad stood near the door, not really looking at me. Mark spoke first. "This whole thing is being blown way out of proportion," he said. I just looked at him. "Is it?" I asked. My voice was quiet. "You went to the news. You made it sound like we just left you to die," he said. "You did leave me," I replied. "I asked for a ride and you told me to get an Uber." My mother immediately jumped in. "That is not fair, Sarah. We had a commitment. You can't just expect people to drop everything for you." "I can't," I agreed. I've never been able to." Just then, one of the nurses, Nurse Evans, came in to check my vitals. She saw the tension in the room but went about her work. Her presence made me feel a bit stronger. "You know," I said, looking at my mother, "I can list other times." "Sarah, don't," my mother said warningly, but I continued. "When I broke my arm when I was 8, you left me at the neighbor's so Mark could go to his game. When I won the state essay prize, you left the ceremony early. When I graduated from college, Dad's first question was about money. At my wedding, you paid more attention to Mark's date than to me. And when I was in the hospital after I lost my arm, you asked me about my salary." Mark looked uncomfortable. "That's all in the past," he said. "It doesn't matter now." "It matters to me," I said. "It all matters. It's a pattern. It mattered when you told me to get an Uber after I'd been traveling for 30 hours from a combat zone. You say it's a misunderstanding, but I understand it perfectly." My dad finally spoke. "We just didn't realize how tired you were." "Did you ask?" I asked him. He didn't have an answer. Nurse Evans finished checking my IV and said, "Sarah, you'll be discharged soon. You need to decide where you're going to go to recover. It should be somewhere you feel safe." My mother stepped forward. "Of course she's coming home with us. We're her family." "No," I said. The word was quiet but firm. "I'm not going home with you." They all stared at me. "The people in this community, strangers, have shown me more care in the last 3 days than you have in my entire life. A hotel offered me a room. A plumber is fixing my house. They see me. You never have." My mother threw the flowers down on the table. "You are embarrassing us, Sarah." "No, Mom," I said, meeting her eyes. "You embarrassed yourselves." Mark swore under his breath and walked out of the room. My mother followed him. My dad stayed for a moment, looking at me as if he wanted to say something, but In the end, he just shook his head and left too. When I was discharged from the hospital, my family wasn't there. Instead, my neighbor from across the street, Ms. Peters, was waiting for me. She had a small bag with some snacks and a magazine. "I saw the story on the news," she said softly. "I'm so sorry. I'm here to give you a ride wherever you need to go." I was surprised. I barely knew her, but she was here when my own family wasn't. I went to the hotel that had offered me a room. The manager was very kind and said I could stay as long as I needed to. The room was clean and comfortable, and I finally felt safe. Over the next few weeks, the community really did help me. The plumbing company fixed the pipes in my house, and a different company came in to clean up the water damage and make sure the furnace was working properly. I started going to a support group for the veterans, and it helped to talk to other people who understood. I also started my physical therapy. My therapist, Mike, was a tough but kind man who pushed me. "You're not broken," he told me one day. "You're just learning a new way to be strong." Mrs. Peters brought me food several times a week, and other neighbors offered to help with groceries or yard work. These people didn't have to help me, but they chose to. That meant more to me than I can explain. My family did try to contact me. I got a card from my parents that just said, "Thinking of you." Mark left a voicemail complaining about how people at his work were treating him. No one ever said they were sorry. I eventually stopped expecting them to. Instead, I focused on my own recovery and on finding a way to help others. I started a small local fund to help female veterans who were returning home and needed immediate assistance with things like rent, utilities, or transportation. I named it after two of my friends from my squad who didn't make it back. At our first meeting, I stood up in front of a small crowd of supporters. "This fund isn't about charity," I said. "It's about being present." When I came home, the people who were there for me weren't the ones I expected. I learned that family isn't just about blood. It's about who shows up. It's been 6 months since I came home. My house is repaired and I've started working in my garden again. My late husband, Ben, always loved the tomatoes I grew. As I was picking one, I found myself smiling. The house feels like a home again, safe and quiet. I feel better too. I'm stronger, not just physically, but mentally. I've learned that I can't change my family. They still send texts, which I usually don't read. I've stopped waiting for them to become the people I needed them to be. I have a new community now, people I can count on. I still think about that night in the hospital, with the phone showing all those missed calls. I'm glad I didn't answer. I realized I didn't need their approval or their excuses. My revenge, if you can call it that, wasn't about yelling or confrontation. It was just about building my own life, setting boundaries, and finding peace without them. It was about learning to be fine, but this time on my own terms.